Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new session of Software World with Can Dost. This is the show where I invite people to talk about different topics in the software and tech industry. I'm Can Dost, your host today, and we will talk about mobile app development and its challenges at scale. We will focus on how mobile apps and development process are different in bigger applications, and we will explore how the companies can overcome these obstacles. My guest today is Fırat Karataş. Fırat is an iOS engineer at SoundCloud, and he's a friend of mine back from Istanbul. Welcome, Fırat. I'm glad that you are here with us today. How are you? You are muted, Fırat.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. Yeah, I'm fine. I had a long day with like bunch of meetings, so finally I am in another meeting. So we can talk about some software issues.
Yeah, this is not yet another meeting. It's like
Yeah, I was just kidding.
Yeah. Okay. Could you tell us a bit about SoundCloud? You're working at SoundCloud, or for how long, and how big is the company, and how many engineers you have there?
Yeah, sure. SoundCloud, some of you already know, it's an audio platform, mainly targeted to the music makers and music listeners, but like you can also put all kinds of audio in a place, like podcasts, for example. But it's mainly used for music discovery, to be specific. So it's a bit different than other audio platforms, like music platforms per se. So you can explore music. You can find new genres, like anything really. It's a bit different than the other streaming platforms because it also has a social aspect of it. So you can actually engage with your fans if you are a musician, or you can engage with people you're a fan of by comments, like reposting stuff. So you can have a one-to-one relationship with people. So it's basically like a YouTube but for audio. Yeah, and I'm working at SoundCloud for almost 2 years now. I guess it's gonna be 2 years in a month or so. Yeah, I work as a senior iOS engineer at SoundCloud. I am working on the creator organization of the company, so it means I am working on features and projects mainly targeting to creators such as yourself, Chandos. So, like for example, we are working on the profile project, which is mainly used by creators because creators like they care about their profile, not the listeners, because listeners are usually passive listening users. They just come into the platform and they just consume the content and just leave. They don't really care about their presence, but the creators does. So we are taking care of it.
Cool, nice. How big is the company actually? I know you have multiple offices, you had maybe pre-COVID times. And how many engineers you have?
We still have multiple offices. Like the headquarter is in Berlin, where I'm living at right now. We have a second biggest office in New York, and the third office in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles office actually, like SoundCloud acquired a company a couple months back. I guess it's almost a year now. So the company was in Los Angeles. So since we acquired them, so there's another SoundCloud office in Los Angeles. So there are 3 offices, and the almost entire engineering team is in Berlin, except the Los Angeles part because they already have their engineering team there. I'm not really sure about how many engineers are there, like exactly, but I think it was about like 120 to 150, something like that. So I don't really know the most current number.
Do you know the mobile part at least? Maybe you're aware of this.
I do. We have around like 18 to 20 iOS engineers, and almost similar number with the Android engineers. So it's around like 30 to 40 engineers, mobile engineers. We don't have any other platform rather than Android and iOS.
Okay.
So we don't have Windows Phone engineers.
Yeah, Windows Phone supporting is a bit pain, I would say. At least that was my experience.
I don't know if they're still releasing new OS versions of Windows Phone.
I think they are, but I'm not sure. At some point, there was if I remember correctly, there was like a discussion about updating Windows phones to Android, but I'm not sure. I really didn't follow that path, so I really don't know. Since you don't have the other platforms, so you are basically native apps. You're developing the native parts. And what's your current tech stack actually? Like how much in iOS part? Maybe you are not really familiar with Android part, but for iOS part, how much? Like how many percentage you have for the Swift, for example? I know, or I guess you have legacy part from Objective-C.
Yeah, we do.
And Swift UI is the next question for that text.
Yeah. As far as I remember, we have half and half with like Objective-C and Swift. We don't, as like all the other companies out there, I guess, maintaining the legacy code, we don't create new Objective-C code unless we really have to because of some dependency. I haven't really created any Objective-C code so far in the last 2 years, so we are creating Swift for the everything new. It comes with the Swift, and I think it's a half and half. And it's both projects are entirely native projects, so there's no cross-functional, cross-platform technologies that we use for the mobile. Swift UI, we most recently started using Swift UI.
Interesting. Really?
Like, yeah. So, like since 2 months or so, like 2-3 months or so. So we are doing some trials, like some experimentation, which I have some doubts about, like because I don't really see how it would fit into our current structure, current architecture, and I would actually like to hear about like how people are maintaining and like changing their architecture to the Swift UI, because there needs to be some change, because Swift UI's way of working is a bit like different than what we have right now. So there is still exploration going on. So we haven't really like decided on a final architecture yet, but we are using Swift UI, and we are even using Combine as well with it. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I expect the adoption rate to be a bit lower, to be honest, because it is not it's a really big change in both in architecture and also the language between like from imperative and declarative style changes.
Yeah.
So yeah. I expect this switch to take longer than other changes we had in iOS.
Yeah, exactly. There's a learning curve actually. Like we are using Swift UI, and like it's something new concept for me, and like Combine is also a different concept, like programming concept. There's also that things are going slow, but so far I can tell Swift UI is amazing. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility and ease of implementation actually, because like it's quite easy to implement such complicated views with the Swift UI. The only concern that I'm having, like, where can we put this in our current architecture, which we mainly use Viper, and if we put like we can, like, the whole architecture is built up on a basis that we can replace things, right? So we can tackle the items in isolation. So every module can be tackled as in isolation, and they can be replaced. But it's not quite possible with Swift UI to replace the view layer of the architecture because of the ownership problem. So right now, if you look at the Viper stack, I don't know, I'm talking like in
no, go on. Everything is okay. You're gone.
So when you look at the Viper stack, the view part owns the other stacks in a tree.
Yeah.
If you look at it, so the view is owned by the navigation stack, and it works perfectly, because if the view goes out of the navigation, like if you pop out the screen or if you kill the screen, everything connected to it just goes off the memory. So like everything dies connected to the view. But the thing is, you don't really push the Swift UI view to the navigation stack as you would do with the UI kit. As far as I know, there's some solution Apple proposed with like this new UI hosting view controller. So it's basically like a wrapper around the Swift UI components, which is I assume it's a subclass of UI view controller. So basically, like Apple says, you can put Swift UI components into a UI kit component, and you can use them. You can use the architecture. But again, like the whole system of Swift UI is just working great with like root views and everything. Like if you have everything with Swift UI, it just works super nice. I really don't have deeper knowledge about like how we can put inside something we have in UIKit and make it work.
I think you have to go like full Swift UI to get the maximum benefit of it. Otherwise, it will be pain. It's not like adding a Swift to Objective-C project, which was also hard in the beginning, to be honest. There were like many problems between bridges and etc. I remember the pains in general, and also the updates happened to Swift was a lot of breaking changes are happened to Swift, and I expect this to happen to Swift UI too. Even though it's like a different, I mean, one is a framework and other one is language. I understand, but still, I expect that the Swift UI might change a bit more. So that's why I didn't start it yet in any project. And I also wait a bit more. But I have like, since you already adopted this one, what is the minimum iOS version do you support actually?
Since last month, it's iOS 13. So we dropped the support for iOS 12, which was a huge topic actually, because like we still had some users in iOS 12, and if you're working with like millions of people, like even the small percentages makes difference, because like those small percentages mean big numbers, and those big numbers mean big money.
Yeah, like when you have 10 million users and 1% is using your app, basically it is like hundreds of 100,000 users, and I cannot imagine they are paid users, so it's like it's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, like that would be a discussion to have. Like, it's not about SoundCloud itself, but generally, like if like people, interesting enough, like people who pays for the service or anything, basically like app or service or anything or subscription, they are open to adoption. So they pay the money. So they generally speaking, like they are open to new versions. So they don't really mind updating their software or like operating system in that regard. So if we think about it in a way, people who still have iOS 12 don't really care about using free version of the platform. I'm just speaking out of my guesses, you know, like I don't really have the numbers.
Yeah, it's okay. So this like the decision brings me like another question of that. So you said it was a big discussion, and I'm now thinking like how the teams are structured in the big scale, because basically what you have is at the end is a one project. It's like one app that goes to App Store or Google Play Store, doesn't matter. But the decision-making process is a bit different in bigger teams, because you have many teams trying to contribute to the same product, and sometimes they are even stepping on each other's toes, for example. So I'm more curious about how you make those decisions. Like, how do you do plannings and these decision makings?
So the teams are like, I'm speaking about SoundCloud when I'm telling about this. I'm not saying this is how it should be, but we have what we call vertical teams, which includes cross cross-functional people, and then these teams are focused on specific parts of the business. So, for example, my team is focused on the creative parts, and then we have what we call horizontal teams, which are basically group of people who are working in the platform. So, for example, the iOS collective is one of them. Android collective is the other one. There's also another horizontal team, which is focusing on the engineering experience topics. So basically, they are working to make our lives easier in the day.
Like platform engineers.
Exactly. Exactly. So, though, like they have specialized iOS engineers in that team. So they are working on the tooling that we are using in day-to-day life. So the team structure is generally like this. So we are spending most of our times in vertical teams and some of our time in horizontal teams, and there's a dedicated team working on tooling that makes our lives easier. So I can say the organizations.
Vertical teams are more like a feature teams that
exactly
responsible for some specific part of the product.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess Spotify had a article about this. So they were calling them squads, and like in the bigger organization they call it tribes. I don't remember what they call the horizontal teams.
Yeah. I think that was the correct terminology there. But still, so okay, you have this vertical and horizontal things, and for example, deciding that you're gonna drop iOS 12, who makes the decision then? Because platform tooling teams need to work on this to change this. I'm just guessing because it's not a product feature directly. But at the end, you are in an iOS team on the horizontal side, and how do you make this decision then?
So, like this generally goes on with asynchronous communications, which many of the companies are adopting, as far as I know, recently. So we are using this method, what we call Rfc Planning Process. So it's just short for request for a change. So usually those platform teams, like speaking about the dropping a version or like setting the minimum version for the platform. So the platform team creates this RFC and just writes down what they're thinking and why they are thinking this is a good decision. For us, it was a good decision because we wanted to use Swift UI. So the case was strong. So they create this RFC and people are commenting on it, and like basically it's a cross-functional collaboration on the document. So like product people commenting on it, design people commenting on it, mostly engineers are commenting on it. So at the end, the things are discussed there, and unless there is a huge red flag or no go, this RFC turns into a project in the team. So after that point, team is responsible to convert this into a project.
So
which usually,
So in this case, the developer tooling team is responsible.
Yeah, exactly. But like from time to time, platform team is like they're short of the resources. So sometimes other teams are helping them to get things back to speed. Because they are not really like, we are a team of 20 iOS engineers and 20 something Android engineers. It's really hard to keep the speed up, with that many engineers. Like the demand is high, so they cannot do everything themselves. So like time to time, we help them to get the things back to speed. And for specifically iOS 12 issue, I remember some of the feature team helped the platform team to drop the support.
Okay, so you have this platform team, but sometimes you are working on one change in the feed, like vertical teams, for example, in the feature team, and this change affects the whole app, for example, or does it? That's also a question. And how do you make this change? How do you make this happen? Because then do you hand over to platform tooling because it affects whole app, or you just go for it maybe, or do you write an RFC, or do you have to maybe?
So it's the whole thing, like in my opinion, not just for SoundCloud, but I think generally it all should start with verbal discussions, you know. So for us, it starts with weekly meetings for the iOS collective. So we start discussing the topics there. So we get people's ideas and like what do they think, their suggestions. So if it seems like obvious, yes, that people are happy about it, so we just go for it and do it. And afterwards we create a record of it. So
what is record in that case?
So I don't really remember the correct terminology for it. We call it like architectural decision record, I guess.
Yeah, ADR. It's correct. Yeah, it's correct term. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, exactly. So we just put the records after we change something in the architecture. If it seems like a viable solution for majority in the iOS collective, like where we discuss things verbally. But if it seems like there are like second opinions or like doubts about what we are talking, or like it requires more, like it requires deeper discussion, so we create an RFC then. So then we can discuss it deeper. So it really depends on how people's reactions to the verbal discussions, which I think it should be generally, because like you cannot create an RFC for everything, because it requires time. So if you create an RFC for, like, it really depends on how obvious is that change, you know, like if it requires some discussions, then yes, but like if it seems like obvious, yes, then it just like you would just spend time, like waste time creating an RFC, and people probably won't be commenting on it because it's just an obvious yes. And in that case, we just do it, and then we create a record so that people can see what we have done afterwards.
Okay. No, I understand. Yeah, it makes sense. You cannot write RFC for everything, and I think you shouldn't, even if I am really advocating RFC all the time, but it is something that you need to first speak verbally, get an agreement on, or maybe at least get the initial feedback, doesn't matter the topic, and then you can decide to write an RFC or not, depending on the case. But you said your team, or like the whole app is architectured with Viper. And now this brings a question to my mind that I recently read the 33 mobile app challenges from Gergely, and that Gergely worked in Uber, and they use Ribs, and they rewrote whole app with the new Ribs architecture from Uber. They open sourced it later. But why did you choose Viper? That's my question. Like, because I see there are some companies, even with bigger apps, like Uber before, they were using MVC, and they decided to rewrite everything, and they decided to go with Ribs. And why did you, if you know, why did you choose Viper?
So maybe we can start with like how different are the architectures, like design patterns from each other. Like in my opinion, apart from Apple's MVC, which was a disaster, so the other architectures like MVVM, MVP, Viper, or whatever you name it, so they're basically like front end like design patterns, and they're basically an extension, or like a next step from the MVC, the original MVC, right? So when you look at the Viper, for example, it's just like you still have the view, you still have the controller, you still have the model. It's just like you separate those specific components even to more specific components. Like for a controller, you have a presenter, you have an interactor, and you have a router. So you separate the controller into 3 more components. So basically, it's a next step of MVC. So to your question, why we chose Viper is, I think it just like it depends on how complicated you need your design pattern to be. So when you look at the Viper, it has like all the components you would need from a mobile application software pattern. but sometimes you don't need them. Like sometimes you don't need a router. Sometimes you don't need a like presenter. Sometimes you don't need an interactor.
Yeah.
So basically, it's like decision choosing the Viper was because we give the tool set to the engineers. So this is the tool set you can use, but you don't have to use all of them. So it can give as much flexibility as we need, but we always make sure that we don't over-engineer the things. So like if we don't need the Viper's router, you just call it Vipe, you know, like you don't have to create the R of it, you know.
Yeah.
Like this is generally the discussion, but I'm not really sure, like to be honest, I'm not really sure what RIB pattern is. Like maybe you can tell, maybe you can tell me about like.
I'm not really familiar, to be honest, because
Okay.
I didn't take a deep look into the RIBs, but what Uber was doing at that time, they just rewrote from MVC to RIBs, and they are mostly proud of with the tooling they came up. So whatever you create, any component, like maybe a new feature, they just create everything at once. It's not like your case in this case, because basically so if you have the same tooling with RIBs, I just assume that you're going to get Viper parts, like VIPER parts, every time you want to create a feature. But it's an interesting approach, because most of the time companies force the architecture, saying that, okay, even if you have a deadly simple feature and you need to create the whole components, whole modules that you need to do. And this is an interesting approach, and I rarely see this, to be honest, because
I mean, like I don't know what's the reasoning behind creating like, for example, I've seen some code as well, like they have one component, like one layer, which is just like a thinnest layer you could imagine. It's just like getting the data and passing it on, and like sometimes you don't really need them. Like for example, if you don't go nowhere else from that screen, you don't really need the router, right? So like you're not routing it anywhere, so why would you have it, you know? But sometimes you need even more components. Like sometimes we even have an additional component to the Viper, because like we have so many inputs coming from the user in that feature. So we needed an additional component who handles this traffic, and it's work as like a traffic junction, and like sends the correct information to the place. So it really depends on how you need the stuff, but generally speaking, whatever you do, you just like do the dependency injection correctly so that you can isolate the things, right? So like do MVVM, do Viper, do YP, whatever you do, you just do you just invert the dependency to somewhere that you can actually isolate the things, and you inject those things that you need in the view. So like basically whatever you do it right. So it doesn't really matter if you stick with the Viper itself, you can, but when you do things into the rules, like this solid rules in per se, so then everything is easy to replace, you know, like you can replace things, you can separate things, you can remove some component and just connect it with the other one, like you know, like unify them.
This reminds me the from the software architecture book, it's saying that there is no best architecture, there is just least bad architecture. So you can just aim for being the least bad one instead of going for the best architecture. This modularization and the making things right brings another question for me about testing, because when you modularize the app, it means that it's easier to test. And how do you do testing in at scale? Like, I guess you have tons of automated tests and maybe UI tests, and also at QA, like manual testing. How is your testing processes from unit tests to manual tests?
Well, We have all of them. So we have we have unit tests for everything, or like almost for everything. It's engineers responsible to write the unit tests. We have integration tests as well for most of the stuff. We have UI tests, like acceptance tests, which test the entire thing from like end to end.
For,
and we also
for
have
all application, the UI tests?
Almost all of it, as far as I know. Like it's but it's a whole another topic. Like UI tests are flaky, and it's really hard to maintain them. And if you're working on a project with so many different localizations and so many different detail pages, it's hard to maintain them, and it's usually flaky. But yeah, we have them, and we are still maintaining them. I'm not really sure how many % of the application is covered with the UI tests, but it's covering most of the happy paths, at least. Yeah, we also have a manual testing as well, but we don't actually have an internal manual testers, but like we outsource them to a company. They do the testing for us, and they send back the result. But generally speaking, manual testing is not something that we rely on, and which I personally think is the correct way. So I've heard many engineers thinking that they're relying on the manual testing, and they've been saying, oh, if there's something wrong, then the manual testers can catch it. But that's just wrong. Like you should be relying on your own testing, and whatever you just deliver, it should be reliable, or like you should be accountable of it. Like you should be sure about the quality of the code, not just the actual technical quality, but also how it is protected with the product bugs. You can have the greatest code ever, like the architecture ever, but it's not doing what you want to do, so it's just not good enough then. I think that would be solved with some automated UI test as well. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't believe in, not believe in is a strong word, but like I don't really trust manual testing.
Yeah, it's human factor is a tricky thing, because when you put humans into one task that you want to get the best result, it's often ends up with being less than best, I would say. Sometimes you have really good QA people just can test the app perfectly.
Yeah, like sometimes they can be annoying as well.
Yeah, I mean,
just software developers speaking. It's like, oh, I took the phone, I rotated, and I threw it in the air, and then I just like jumped on it, and now it crashes. It's like sometimes just like quite annoying. Like I'm not saying they are doing wrong, but it's just to me sometimes it's annoying.
Like there was like I remember from my old job that there was like a 1K engineer just get into the phone get the phone, and right before getting into the elevator just pressed the one feature and jumped into the elevator, and it was claiming that the connection was broken and the app is crashing. It's like, and I mean, how can you really test this case? Because you need to like get the computer with you. You need to jump at the same time, etc.
And you need a nice building to have the elevator. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So since you have a lot of automated tests, this is like of course related to that one, which brings me to CI and CD topic, like continuous integration and continuous development. So you are like 20 iOS engineers working in the same code base, and you have a UI test, you have automated tests. Like how long is your pipeline actually? Like you push a change to, let's say you open a PR or merge request or pull request, and then how much time you wait for it to be the green so you can merge it?
So it developed a lot actually, because like we invest a lot in the modularization of the application, so the build times are quite fast right now. And but generally speaking, it really depends on how fast you get the thumbs up from your pull request. But if you're asking what happens after you get the pull request approved, it takes around, I guess it takes around like half an hour or something. It really depends on the CI's business. You know, like sometimes it's just slow. You know, like it's a third party tool we use, and it's just sometimes slow. Sometimes it just cannot parallelize the builds. But generally speaking, I think it takes around like half an hour or so to get the master green.
Ah, that's quite fast,
Which we
I must admit.
currently switching master naming to the main naming.
Ah, okay. That's
So it's a main branch.
That's I really must admit that it's fast in the big application, because I remember like our application, it takes around 20 minutes, and we were working like 2 engineers. It was a big app, but the team was really small, and it was taking 20 minutes for the build on Bitrise. That's
as I said, I mean, like we invested a lot in modularization of the application, so the build times are faster, which changed a lot. Like I don't know how many percent from the top of my head, but like it's quite faster than when I joined. So in the last 2 years, so we spent a lot of effort on making builds faster.
Oh, so this is all like okay. Now I understand.
Which is quite important, actually. Like if you're working with a huge team with like 20 engineers working on the same project, so you need to make things go. You know, like you can never stop trying. You should like it's the master or the main branch always has to be green, and you have to keep going. Like because let's say if you have like if your app is slower by 10%, it's slower by like your build times are slow by 10%. Then it's slow by 10% for every engineer.
Yeah.
And if it's 10 engineers working on the same thing, it's just like you're spending one engineering day for the same task if it's like 10 times slower for 10 engineers. And we are working like 20 engineers. So things has to be faster.
Like 1 minute of the build time, for example, equals 20 minutes actually, with every build. So it's quite important. And yeah, this is a tricky point, because it's really hard to get it right, especially on the CI, because there's like sometimes the tool is messy, like Travis or Bitrise, so you need to set up that one correctly, and then later on you need to focus on the app architecture to make it correct and modularize, and I don't know, try many different things, and you will fail a lot for sure, and that it will be pain. It is. I cannot really imagine, because modularizing app means many different things, and sorry, and at the same time, when you modularize, then you need to take care of how these modules communicate with each other, and how do you embed them in the app, then how do you work with those things, and if you create frameworks or libraries, or which one do you choose for which case, like making things a lot more complicated than it has been before.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. Like first of all, like for that kind of complicated architecture, so in the iOS part, at least I can say that we are using such a super nice command line tool to generate the project for us, which solves some of our problems about the dependencies between the frameworks. And for the other part, so we are generally following the dependency inversion principle to inject one framework to another one. So basically, we don't directly use one framework in the other one, but we are basically inverting its dependency back to a interface, so that we only take the necessary parts from one piece of framework to the other one. So we are not basically exposing one big framework to the other one, because that makes things spaghetti and like make things quite slow in that regard. And sometimes you need you need something from framework A to framework B, and sometimes you need something from framework B to framework A. So it creates like a dependency cycle, which you cannot really do. So like the compiler doesn't allow you to, you know, like depend on each other, because yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? So we kind of solved that problem, creating a rule that we always, if we need to pass something from one dependency to the other one, we always invert the dependency to a higher level framework, so that we only pass the necessary parts to the other one.
Makes
which is generally how things work with any software in any scale. So you shouldn't be depending on concrete types. In our case, concrete types are frameworks itself, so concrete frameworks. So you shouldn't be depending on them. You should basically depend on something in higher level, so that you don't really depend on them, because dependencies are hard. So you should be you should loosen the connection between dependencies as much as you can, so that you have flexibility and isolation. Sorry.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So now this, when you loosen the dependencies, I will come to another point, to the releases, because so you at the end, with the CI and everything, you create a one build and merge them everything together, and at the end you submit this one. And I don't know how you do it. Maybe you have release I think it's called release trains, or maybe 2 weeks release cycles, and etc. But now I'm curious that since many engineers working and you modularize everything, how do you merge those things to master or main branch, your main branch, and how do you keep the master green in that case?
So we have, like, first of all, every main branch commit basically triggers an alpha build. So every commit has a new build in the alpha job, basically. So that's that. And also, like, how we are not stepping each other's toes. So there are multiple layers of that question. So it starts with the software pattern that we just talked. So if you're like isolating your components into modules, then it's easier to work on. So you're not touching in this same module as much as you did. The second layer is the modularization of the application. So we are working with frameworks. So I don't know how many exactly, but like we have, I guess, more than 20 different frameworks in the application in the entire project. So it's like, for example, my team is working in a profile. There is a profile framework that is doing the profile job. So basically, whenever there is a change in the profile, which is done by another team, GitHub warns us that there's a change in the framework, the profile framework. And since we are the owners of that framework, at least one of our team members should thumbs up to the PR so that it gets merged. So we are always aware of the changes in our frameworks that we own, but that is the same for every other team. So every team has their own framework, and they need to thumbs up for the changes happening there. This really looks like the microservice architecture that many of the companies are using in their distributed systems. So the frameworks are owned by the teams. Basically, this solves a lot of problems, because we basically isolate a part of the code and gave it to the team, and that team, since that team is like syncing and talking to each other daily, so it's solving that minimal problems in the team. So like you don't really work on the same thing. Like sometimes you do, sometimes you have to solve. Yeah, sometimes you have to solve the conflicts. You know, like that's inevitable. But we avoided that problem as much as we could, and I think it's for a team of like this, I think it's working just smooth so far.
Do you work like for the releases I'm talking about? Do you have release cycles like weekly, 2 weeks spaced, or? Yeah,
we release the application every week. It used to be 2 weeks, but like it wasn't enough for us because like like people are working on the project, right? So they're developing new features, and people need, like mostly product people need those features out. Like 2 weeks is too much for an app like SoundCloud. So we changed it to the 1 week cycle. So every week we release a new version, and so there's a release captain every week. Like it changes every week, and release captain is responsible for that version. But generally speaking, like even bigger companies, I guess, like they have a dedicated team for these kind of issues, like testing and release processes. But since like SoundCloud is not that big yet, so we are basically like delegating the work to the iOS engineers in a rotation basis.
I think it's still big, but maybe not that Facebook big, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, like Spotify has like Spotify is a huge company, right?
Yeah.
So they have around like 25 to 30 people just working on the platform related issues. You know, it's a huge number.
Yeah, it's like whole SoundCloud team in this case. Yeah. So you release the app, and then of course crashes happen. So you cannot avoid as much as we want, and as many tests you write or you do the manual testing, you cannot avoid the crashes. And how do you handle the crashes? Because I know some companies use feature flags for literally everything, and then when they see a crash, they just turn the feature flag off. And how do you revert these crashes, for example? Do you have an on-call also?
Yeah, we have an on-call schedule for iOS engineers, iOS project as well. So people are waiting for any problems happening in the production. Yeah, we do have feature flags, so we hide some of our features behind the feature flag, and it's generally a good tool. You know, like you can revert things back. So like if there's something wrong, you can just take off the feature from the application, so everything is good. But like I don't know how would it work with, like, if you put feature flags in front of everything like that would be hard to maintain. Like we don't do that, but like maybe it's a good solution. I don't really have strong opinion about that, but generally speaking, it's a good tool to use because not just because of disaster aversion, but like it's also nice to do like A/B testing, for example. So if you want to do an A/B testing, you can just use remote configurations for that. Or like if you want to do a phase rollout for a specific feature, not for the entire application, you can use them as well. But if there is a crash, then it depends on. So if there is an important crash, which we have some pipelines to detect how important is the crash.
Okay.
If it's important to stop the release, so we just stop the release at whichever percentage it is. So we use App Store's phase rollout. So from 0% to 100%, it takes like 1 week to release the entire version. So we stop the version at that point if there's something wrong, and we immediately start working on a hotfix version, so we can like release a new version and continue with the new version after we stop the previous one. But sometimes it's not as important, right? So it's like sometimes it's just affecting a very small number of users, and sometimes it's really quite edge case. In that case, we just wait for the next cycle. And this was one of the reasons we actually switched to the 1 week releases, because whatever you have a problem, like whatever problem you have about anything, it takes 1 week at most,
Yeah.
So after 1 week you have a new release, so the problem doesn't last long than 1 week if you can detect the problem.
It helps to get the feedback early on with the 1 week 1 week release cycles.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you don't really have long beta phase in that case, you know, like if you have 1 week release, and if you think about it, like engineers are working like 5 days a week, you don't really have a beta phase that long. So it's just like a trade-off, you know, like we shorten the beta phase, but at the same time, like the response time is a lot shorter, like 100% shorter, you know, like it's 1 week shorter than the actual 2 weeks.
Yeah, so we have a question, and do you keep so we talked about the feature flags, and do you keep those flags even after the feature is like measured as stable, and then maybe you said you don't want to do then A/B test anymore, and do you just go and delete them or just leave them as it is, as they are?
No, I mean, if everything is okay with the feature flag and like if it's working, we keep them for a while. I don't really remember the actual timing, but I guess it's 6 months or so. So we have a actual guideline on how to remove the feature flags. So we don't remove them immediately because like some people are not updating their application; they still have the old version. So I'm not really sure about the timing, but no, we don't delete them immediately. We wait until we are sure that everybody has at least a good majority of the users have the new version.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think. Yeah. I don't remember deleting those flags, to be honest, because they always stayed there, and because sometimes we use them to update them even. So like, so it's not a true and false flag we use. We use Firebase remote config, for example, and we use some timestamps. And sometimes we updated those timestamps, and it helped a lot to keep them as where they are.
So basically like this. So you have one feature flag and one local flag that is working together with the remote flag, right? Yeah. So you have the same name for it. The thing is that if you remove the local flag, which you can, the next version that people are downloading, installing to their phones, they won't have the counterpart of the remote flag in their version. But that's fine. I mean, they don't need it.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if you remove the remote flag immediately, then the old, like people who still keep the old version, they won't have their counterparts in the remote configuration. So that's when the things get complicated. So we keep the remote flag until we are sure that everybody get the first build which doesn't have the local config. You know?
Okay, now I understand. Yeah, this way it makes sense. Otherwise, you get like weird behaviors. Yeah, true.
Yeah,
makes sense. Okay, so we are coming to an end almost, and I have one question. I didn't check before, but you said you have the platform engineering team, and do you also have tools specifically built for your use cases, but has some maybe similar tools on the market? And related to that one, do you, as a SoundCloud, maybe do you open source those tools that people can also use, get the benefit?
Like speaking about the iOS platform, I don't think we open source them yet, or I don't even know if we are planning to open source them. But we have some tools, yes. Like we have like, as I said, it's a huge project and it requires a lot of maintenance. So we automated some of those manual work into the script, so that new joiners they shouldn't tackle these like from scratch. So or like they don't have to learn the things from scratch. We have bunch of different scripts for bunch of different like issues. Like I guess at some point we even had like a script for rebasing master. Like I don't remember why, but like there was some specific case for our repo, and then we create the script. So the platform team is working on those stuff. Like sometimes, like for example, I am working on something like this on my free time that I can maybe merge on to our code base. So anyone is free to contribute to those automation. but we generally speaking, we have those kind of tools. Like for example, we have a tool to automate the whatever. So like to make things there's an automation to create the production build and upload it to the App Store, so that we don't have to do all those manual stuff ourselves. So it creates the build and it uploads it. It uploads the like screenshots or whatever. It just archives the binary and like all those miscellaneous work. It's done by our automation tools. It can be better for sure. I'm quite sure some of the companies have better tooling for those kind of manual jobs, but it's the best I've seen so far, to be honest. But again, that being said, I think it can be better.
Of course, yeah, I mean, everything can be better.
Yeah, everything can be better always.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that will be all. Do you have anything else to
add? Yes. Inverted dependencies. Just kidding. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fırat, for being here. I think people can reach you out via Twitter.
Yeah, I think I have a link in the description. And
yeah, so next week we will talk about the career changes. So we have another talk and career developments for software engineers. And everyone knows that career changes don't have to be always from engineer to manager, and it can be from management to engineering as well. And my friend Tobias will be here with us next week, and he's an engineer at the moment, but he worked as an engineering manager for a while, but he decided to go back to engineering, and we will talk about the career plannings next week. So until that time, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us. And thank you, Fırat, for being here. It was a really pleasure, and I really enjoyed this talk.
Yeah, me too.
Bye-bye. See you, everyone.